this in today's talk, and which will focus on the representation of women and nature in visual media, which is, as ma'am said before we began the session, quite appealing and quite relatable to most of the people over here. And before introducing formally our esteemed speaker of the day, I'd like to tell you that she has a very elaborate website where you can find numerous poetry analysis, explanation of various theories, novels, and please visit it. It is www.rukhaya.com. And she has been writing papers on this eco-critical and eco-feminist perspectives of looking at characters in novels, especially a paper that she had published in Sage about Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, which was a very interesting read. To formally introduce her, Dr. Rukhaya is an award-winning writer who has published her works in national and international anthologies and journals. She has won accolades in writing at the national level and international level, including ones from the New Book Society of India, Ekphrasis India, StoryMirror.com, and the Forgotten Writers Foundation, Egypt. Dr. Rukhaya is the recipient of the Ruel International Prize for Criticism 2016 for the most promising upcoming critic. She was chosen by Yahoo as one of the top 1,000 voices on an international level for the years 2011, 2012, and 2013 for her critical writings. In 2016, she was listed as India's Incredible Women Writers of India. She was recently catalogued among the best late 20th century essayists like Arun Shourie, M.J. Akbar, Pankaj Mishra, Arundhati Roy, Amit Chaudhary, A.K. Ramanujan, etc. in the American site humanities.org. She was recently awarded with the Gifted Poet Award 2020 by Women Empowered India. She currently works as Assistant Professor of English at Nehru College, Kasaragod, Kerala. And there is a dedicated site for her articles too, which I will share with you so that you can read what she writes. Welcome, Rukhaya ma'am. We are really honored to have you here with us today. Over to you.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much. So good morning to all of you. Yes, I guess it's close to, it's between good morning and good afternoon. And first of all, I would like to thank all the organizers for having invited me to this UGC Stride lecture series, Nirmala College, Amity University, Principal Investigator Dr. Anjana Singh, and co-investigator Shantini ma'am. And thank you for bearing with me as I was vacillating between the topic. And of course, the wonderful research assistants that you introduced today. And I'm so happy as we talk about ecofeminism, I see this whole endeavor being led by two ladies. So I'm really happy about that. And I've been watching the series, in between my online classes, and I saw the first lecture, especially the one by Ibrahim sir, that was on theory. So before I begin my lecture, I would like to mention that theory is generally seen to be, I personally know Ibrahim sir, and he's a very humble academician friend, but theory is generally seen to be the mainstay of men. And this kind of dichotomy, we generally associate theory with men and literature and poetry with women. You can see the dichotomy of objectivity and subjectivity there also. And the conflict between, intellect and emotion there also. So my today's lecture is actually a collaboration between theory and two movies as text to which I have applied it. And this is the keyword that Ibrahim sir said towards the end of his lecture also, that collaboration is what we have to verge on. And this is what essentially ecofeminism also verged towards. So on that note, I begin my today's lecture. And another thing I wanted to mention was the organizers have especially requested me to, explain the basic difference between eco-criticism and ecofeminism, because sometimes the terms are synonymously used. So the first 10 minutes of my session will be devoted to a quick explaining of the fundamentals, because I cannot go into explanation without dwelling on those. So with your permission, shall I screen share?
Yes, ma'am, sure. Please share this.
Okay. Please let me know if my screen is visible. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Okay. So the topic is tracing eco-feminist concerns in Sherni and Cheluvi. Now, the reason I have taken up these two movies is Cheluvi is about a tribal girl and a tribal uneducated girl, and Sherni is about an educated forest officer who comes to a similar rural arena. So I have actually juxtaposed both these heroines to show that the fight against patriarchy and the system is essentially the same. And all the dialectical pairs that you see working in ecofeminism, you can see it working here also, whether it is an educated woman or an uneducated woman. So first of all, before explaining what ecofeminism is, I come to what is eco-criticism. Eco-criticism actually began as a, a kind of activist movement with activist undertones, but it has come now to stand for an umbrella term for a variety of issues. That is what Sheryl Blodfelty tells us here. It is a study of the relationship between literature and the physical environment. So anything that is, you can find a number of issues. If you actually read that article that ma'am has just mentioned on Sage, it is there online. How you can connect the literature and environment, a variety of ways. It has come to function as a generic term. So I'll just mention some of the basic concerns of what eco-criticism is. They investigate underlying ecological values, all the things that, all the activism movements that are going on against endangered species, extinct species, conservation of biodiversity, global warming, climate change, the dump of nuclear waste, toxic waste, etc. All these kind of ecological concerns come under the first feature. Second, what is meant by the word nature? Nature actually comes from the word natura, Latin natura, meaning born from, imply essentially that all of us are actually born of Mother Earth. And what has happened, we have this metaphor of Mother Earth, that we have basically the idea that, okay, we can unconditionally exploit, just like our mother at home, we can take her for granted, we can unconditionally exploit her. And a point, where we turn detrimental to her. So what happens is, we turn actually, we are actually like the cells in the body that are eventually turning cancerous against nature. And this is why there's a new era called Anthropocene that has been inaugurated, where man is seen as a decisive force in altering nature. Number three, whether the examination of place should be a category like class, gender, and race. We have gone through all these post-structural discourses. We have gone through all these post-structuralist discourses that show that class, gender, race, etc., all are constructions. And if we have so much of value for all these constructions, then why not for the concept of place, of nature that exists by default? We have the latest spatial theory, where the concept of space and time is explored. So nature is something that exists by default. Then why not give the primary importance? Number four, examine the perception of wilderness and how it has changed throughout history. The perception of wilderness or nature has not been the same. Just to cite a few examples, from the beginning, man was actually scared of nature. Then he was in awe of it. Then he started worshipping it. That's why you have all the different nature gods. And then, where you fast forward to the Romantic age, you find nature as, something capable of spiritually enhancing his soul. Then come the Victorian age, Industrial Revolution. It inaugurated a sharp divide between an economic sphere and a natural sphere, where unproduced raw material could be unconditionally appropriated from nature. And nature was actually seen as an intrusion into civilization. So that the peak of displacement of man from culture to nature actually occurred during the industrialization in the period of industrial revolution, when this sharp divide took place, and actually the maximum people started getting transported from the rural arena to the urban one. Question number 5, whether current, and not only that, and from that kind of perception, we have reached to an age of, virtual reality, simulation, augmented reality, where, you can find nature created as simulations. You need not go in this pandemic situation, you can find it virtually created. You can find the juxtaposing of both online also. So this is how the perception of wilderness has actually changed. And then question number 5, this is something very basic, where current environmental issues are represented or even mentioned in popular culture. Then the role of physical setting. How does physical setting play an important role in a piece of literature? I'll give you an example. If some of you might have gone through Roger May's Blackout. This story is actually about a white American upper class woman and a black Jamaican lower class man, and the conflict between them both. And at the outset of the story, you can actually find a setting where, the place of the elite, it is demarcated by a hedge, showing that they are set off from the other landscape or the other people. So, these kind of physical settings actually echo or symbolize the idea of environmental racism, where, the actions of the elite actually have a detrimental results for the have-nots. For one example is, I'll give you one basic example, is the effluent use so much of refrigerators and ACs, and you have the emissions of CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, and you have the consequent global warming. But who are the bearers of these consequences? It is the have-nots, because the effluent do not have to face the heat generated. So this kind of, diligently or very intelligently, the role of physical setting also can play a very important role in literature. Question number 7, whether it is consistent with ecological wisdom. Indeed, because, it is nature that has actually taught us all these lessons. Or from prehistoric man, when he learned to rub stones and learns the harnessing of fire, it is actually by seeing the lightning strike. And even, all the basic invention and discoveries, if you go back, everything nature has taught us a lesson, whether it is a hammer, it is a hand actually holding a stone. Or, you find the lessons like symbiosis, give and take, osmosis, balance, or the revolution of the sun, or the rotation, the basic lesson of order. All these lessons are actually given to us from nature. And 8, how do certain metaphors of nature influence why we it? For some reason, we use man, in Sherni, you might have come across that concept, man-eater. We call animal man-eater. Then we have all these derogatory expressions, as blind as a bat, as wild as a marsh hare, as cunning as a poisonous as a snake, as cunning as a fox. And I need not say about the feminine aspect of that. Yahya sir had mentioned some of those. Vixen, vixen, it is then bitch, the feminine counterpart. Then you have henpecked, bird-brained, she looks fat as a cow. So all these, how, certain metaphors of nature, when we use it, how does it serve as an influence? So we'll do a quick fact check, this is basically for students. William Rukert actually coined this in his essay, Literature and Ecology, an Experiment in Eco-Criticism. And the first use of the term ecology was by Karl Kroeber. And the word eco-criticism and green studies, though we use this interchangeably, there is a slight difference. The term eco-criticism is generally associated with the United States and is often associated with Association for the Study of Literature and Environment. And they have their in-house journal also, Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature. And Sherald Lord-Felty, the famous co-author of Eco-Critical Reader, along with Harold Frum, she is a co-founder. Now, what is the difference between eco-criticism and green study? It is similar, but you find the same kind of differences that you find between, say, new criticism and practical criticism, because new criticism is American and practical criticism is British. There are subtle differences. And also, like new historicism is American and cultural materialism is British. And there you have some subtle differences. Here also, eco-criticism is American. It has American precursors, while green studies is the UK version. And one second, I'll just move this side. Yes. And yeah, you have basically eco-criticism. It has its roots in transcendentalism, and you know the precursors of transcendentalism: Emerson, Margaret Fuller, Thoreau. And on the other hand, green studies has its precursors or its origin in Romanticism. And it has its founding father, Jonathan Bate, in Romantic Ecology, Wordsworth, and the environmental tradition. And you also have an important precursor, Raymond Williams, The Country and the City. And another difference is in the way it works. Eco-criticism is actually celebratory. That is why some critics, in a disparaging tone, they also call them tree-hugging criticism. And on the other hand, the other one, actually, it warns us. It is military, and it warns us of threats from the government, from the industry, commercial, and also neo-colonial forces. So these are some basic differences between eco-criticism and green studies. Now, coming to what is the basic difference between eco-criticism and ecofeminism. Philosophy, or I would say predominantly Western philosophy, in all our universities also, we have all the tools and philosophies of the West employed. But, it is, as somebody said in a previous lecture, it is how we adapt it. So philosophy is also generally, rooted in all these dialectical pairs. And Claude Levi-Strauss had also said that with the displacement from culture to nature, come into being all these dialectical pairs. And if you notice in all these dialectical pairs, the first always dominates over the second, and the first is always superior to the second. And if you investigate about 90% of all the dialectical pairs, it can be subsumed, or we can include it under the culture-nature dialectical pair. Just look here, man, woman. Man is generally identified with culture and woman with nature. Abled, disabled, it is to cover the disability purportedly, I'm not saying supposedly, to that disability of nature that culture was invented. Rational, irrational, sun, moon. Okay, this may not fall under, but it is a dialectical pair. All the others, head, body, head is equated with culture and body with nature. Reason, instinct, speech, silence, active, passive. Speech is, we in deconstruction, we talk about phonocentrism or logocentrism, where speech is equated with the culture and silence with nature. Active, I'll take this, and technological and organic. Culture is seen as the technological, active aspect against which that has its achievement against the passive organic background of nature. On the other hand, you can see colonialism also. According to critics, colonialism is actually seen as the masculine thesis, of which diaspora is seen as the feminine antithesis. And then, okay, I've already spoken. I'm not going to all these in detail, so that I don't exceed the time limit. But if you look at 90% of these 90%, around 70% of these can be again included under man-woman. Many among these itself, look in able, disabled, rational, irrational. First, you have culture, nature, and man, woman again can subsume all many of these dialectical pairs. Able, disabled. Uh, uh, Aristotle had said that woman is lacking in certain qualities. Freud had said that woman is a castrated man. Lacan had said that woman is the in the symbolic domain, she is without a phallus. According to Semitic religions, woman was made out of the rib of a man, out of a spare part. So there you have the able disabled dichotomy. Of course, rational irrational, they always talk about a woman's instinct, and there are some sexist remarks that say that intelligent woman is an oxymoron. And of course, the head body dichotomy, all of you will be familiar with this, with especially with Girish Karnad's Hayavadana, a work like that. And then reason, instinct, speech, silence. Also in deconstruction, women in the language, women are identified with the gaps or the aporias where you cannot find meaning. Similarly, colonialism, diaspora, hunter-carrier. In ecofeminism, you might have heard of the hunter-carrier theory, where for hunting, you require a kind of intellect. And the women are seen as the carriers. In the beginning, during the beginning of civilization, women actually used to gather the berries and they used to stay at home, while men used to do all the hunting and used to do all the active kind of work where even the mind works. So what happens gradually, women started to, they actually they made this a kind of they normalized the concept as women started staying home and men would go outside to work. Similarly, you find the same insane, the idea of the mad woman in the attic, and the women are generally associated with madness, hysteria. Hysteria actually comes from hysteron, or the idea of the wandering womb, according to again all these misogynist critics like Freud, who say that hysteria is generally associated with women. Again, so we have all these civilized, uncivilized, technological, organic, we are technological, you keep on hearing all these names, Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Berners-Lee, Charles Babbage. We say the internet has been invented by Tim Berners-Lee. Well, little do people know that the first programmer was actually Lady Ada Lovelace. So all that, even white, black is white, the civilized world, black, the uncivilized. Objectivity, subjectivity that I spoke at the beginning about theory and literature. Objectivity is generally associated with men and subjectivity with women. And gender as being culturally constructed and sex as naturally determined. So all these, even, Orientalism, where, the Orient is seen as an effeminate other for the Westerners to actually construct themselves. So I have actually made a graphic description here. You can see that. So since I've already explained this, things you can see: disabled, sun has said to have its own light. The moon has only borrowed light. So sun is equated with man, and generally we find the moon equated with women. So ecofeminism generally, feminism started in the 1800s, but ecofeminism, modern ecofeminism rather, it started in the 1970s and 1980s. And the term ecofeminism, it was coined by Francois Dubin in 1974. And in 1980s, this ecofeminism as a phenomena, as a movement, it came out of the academic atmosphere and became popular predominantly because Nestra King is seen as the cause of that popularization. She was the person who actually brought it into popular culture. And we have our own practitioners like Vandana Shiva and all the different practitioners: Carolyn Merchant, Val Blumwood, Greta Gard, Susan Griffin, Maria Mize, Veronica Benhold, so many other ecofeminists associated with the movement, theorists. And you can also find that ecofeminism is actually divided into various types. You have vegetarian ecofeminism, spiritual, material, heterosexual ecofeminism, and queer ecofeminism. I'll just give a brief description so you'll be aware. In vegetarian ecofeminism, as you can see from the title, these ecofeminists do not advocate the killing of non-human animals. Okay, that is why and their sexism and speciesism is seen on a parallel plane, and they also deal with issues of intersectionality, where people are marginalized on various levels, and they take it up as a major issue in vegetarian ecofeminism. Spiritual ecofeminism actually deals with women as the I talked about mother nature, how woman is exact reflection of nature as a sustainer, provider, producer, and you have mother nature. But there is a criticism against spiritual ecofeminism that it can give rise to uh, stereotypes, because when you say, the problem is when you say she is the mother, people tend to restrict her only to the mother function. She can only be the mother and nothing else. And that is why when Sonia Gandhi said, I am a woman and I'm a mother and I'm a divorcee, Atal Bihari Vajpayee said, I'm a man and I'm unmarried. So the thing is, the people generally tend to give her the label of a mother and place her on a pedestal, but she is only restricted to that definition. In material ecofeminism, you have all the issues of capitalism coming into play that I will explain in the next slide. And in heterosexual ecofeminism, it deals only with the heterosexual, the man-woman dichotomy. But queer ecofeminism, it actually says that when we only speak about heterosexual feminism, what about the people with the same-sex orientation? Again, when we normalize one kind of sexual orientation, like the heterosexual one, other kinds of orientations are being marginalized. So that is what is addressed actually in queer feminism. Now I'll give you just a basic idea of how these dialectical pairs, the parallel works. One, just as culture imposes boundaries on nature, we find patriarchy also imposing certain kinds of boundaries or constraints on women. You have that in the very prototypal Lakshman Rekha. And this, and it works on various planes, the technological over the organic. We just spoke about material ecofeminism. It particularly deals with issues of capitalism, man exploiting unpaid labor. A woman has to work 24/7 in the house. She never has a salary. She does not get a day off. And also reproductive labor. There are many countries actually trying to pass bills now so that women's unpaid labor will be recognized. And the women question during the Industrial Revolution. The women question was during the Industrial Revolution, women also started coming to work. So men started demanding equal pay. At that time, men started getting threatened, and they said, no, you are a very private, holy thing, and you have to remain in the house. You should not come within the public sphere, and you have to stay within the private sphere. We have this in new feminist theories also. It is a what do you say? It is a revamped package. It is also called austerity nostalgia. It is called the new traditionalism, where women are told that you please stay at home because that is your domain, that is your place of freedom. A kind of euphemism. But the truth is, she is jailed in her own home. And it does not value any attributes. You can see all the parallel attributes that I talk about in the list of dialectical pairs. It does not value it. And again, I already spoke about the animal woman inferiority, that identifying them only in terms of the body. Quite often after a rape, a woman says, I felt like a piece of flesh. And this act of gang rape also, it can be likened to that hunter carrier theory, where the woman is actually being hunted, and she's just looked upon as a piece of flesh or a body. And that is where sexism and speciesism, not giving priority to non-human animals, works on a parallel. And as a result, what happens? Women is just limited to her body, to her womb, to her productivity. So we'll explain more about those while talking about the two movies. Okay, so Cheluvi is the first movie I have actually taken up for analysis, and it is a story of a tribal girl. And Cheluvi means beautiful girl. And this movie has been directed by one of my favorite writers, Girish Karnad. And he won the award for the National Film Award for the Best Film on Environment Conservation Preservation. And it is basically based on a flowering tree, a short story written by R.K. Ramanujan in his 1997 book, A Flowering Tree and Others Oral Tales from India. Now, what happens in Cheluvi is Cheluvi has a very special gift. Once she saves a mendicant from fainting with hunger, and what happens is that he becomes really kind towards her, and he gives her the gift of turning into a tree. That is a secret that is known only to her and her sister. And she has to first chant a mantra. She has to stay like this, and somebody will pour 2 pitchers of water before she turns into a tree. But the mendicant warns her, when anybody plucks the flower, they have to be very careful. They should not hurt the tree. And this is how Cheluvi's life. She turns into a beautiful champak tree, and people revel in its fragrance. And she and her sisters sell those flowers and actually learn their livelihood. And one day, what happens is the village headman's son. He actually follows her. He gets some kind of doubt, and he actually falls in love with that smell of flowers, and he wants to marry Cheluvi. He knows there is something fishy going on, and he marries her. And he coaxes her, and finally she gives out the secret. She tells him, yes, I can, if you pour 2 pitchers of water, I can actually turn into a tree. And this act of turning into a tree, it actually becomes a prelude to his lovemaking. Each time he tells her, she turns into a tree, and he actually enjoys her fragrance. Now, I'm coming to that aspect later. And what happens is his sister, the hero's sister, she also actually comes to know. Her name is Radha. Cheluvi's sister-in-law comes to know this, and she actually coaxes her into revealing the secret. So Cheluvi actually takes her to a place and actually reveals, she trusts her and actually turns into a tree. And unknown to her, a number of children actually hiding behind. And suddenly they come and they play and they break off all the branches, they break off all the flowers. And Cheluvi is very scared because she remembers very specifically the mendicant advice that nobody is supposed to harm the tree. So after some time, when Radha you can see her crying, actually, the cries coming from the broken tree. And after some time, what happens is Radha comes with 2 pitchers of water, and she tries to turn her back into a tree, and she can turn back only into half a tree. And you can see her writhing up in pain. I'll just share a piece of the video. It's possible. 1 second. Please tell me if it is visible. Is it visible, ma'am?
No, I mean, the slide is visible, but we cannot hear anything.
You cannot hear. 1 second. I'll go into a different setting. 1 second.
Please check the box share sound that is given.
Wait, there is an option for sharing videos. Yes. 1 second. Now, can you see?
Yes, we can see it.
Can you hear it?
No, we can't hear anything.
Okay, I'll just quickly swift through this. I can't understand why you can't hear it. Box, let me see. The box is on.
When you start sharing, on the left-hand side corner, there is a box where it says share through computer sound.
Okay, I'll try again. 1 second. That case. 1 minute, I'll just stop this. Okay, share screen. Yeah, this is a video, and share sound, it is already checked, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, fine. Is it audible now?
Yes, now it's audible.
Yeah, okay, fine.
मैं उसे बुला लाती हूँ। पेड़ का ख्याल रखना। हाँ? टाटा। अरे संभल के। और चढ़, और।
Okay, so I'll go back to sharing my slides. I hope that was visible to all. So you can see in the, okay, thank you. So you can see that as they break the rule of not breaking any branch, or not causing any harm to the tree. What happens is that even as she pours back pitchers of water, Chelvi cannot turn into her original form. And Radha gets very scared and she actually deserts her on the forest and she goes off. And even her husband, he'll be searching for her all the while. And one day a hunter actually finds her, and she requests, Chelvi requests that you go and place this half tree, half woman in front of the uh, house. And her husband actually recognizes that is his wife, and he tries to turn her into her original form. Chelvi tells him, if you can collect the lost branches and attach it to my tree and you restore me to my original form, you can restore me to my original form as a human being. Now, what happens in the original short story is the husband is successful. He takes all the branches, he attaches her, and he is successful in turning her back into his original beloved. But in this case, Girish Karnad brings about a twist. No matter how much the husband goes looking out, he cannot find the branches. Only for when he goes to the forest, all he finds are felled trees, showing that the damage that we do to nature is essentially irreversible. So this is basically the story. So in this story also, in this movie, you can find the when the how the motive of humanization works very powerfully. Just imagine if a tree is cut off a branch, do we feel so much pain? But suddenly when a girl writhes in agony, we feel a kind of her sympathy goes out to her, echoing the basic premise of deep ecology, emotional response to nature. Only it is when it is a tree is humanized that we do feel for the trees, and the lack of human sentiment is very much there. There is a particular scene, in where the crying, you have the logs are actually chopped off and placed in the attic of the hero's house, and there are tears, the water falling from that. Those are actually the logs crying. It is a very poignant scene. And so we see that how this movie actually advocates critical post-humanism, the idea that all living beings other than human beings, non-human animals, trees, etc., should be seen as, if we could use Donna Haraway's term, companion species. And again, we find the reinforcing of the mother nature motive. I already told you how nature comes from nature, and we are born from mother nature. We tend to take her for granted. Lou Sirgare also in her Sex at Parentis, she says that quite often that parallel is because we treat nature like mother. She is exploited. We have somehow this idea deeply ingrained that all her resources are free for use, just like we exploit our mother. And after a certain point, when she actually needs us, we are not there. This kind of appropriation of resources, and also wilderness as intrusion. After a certain point, all the time your mother walks behind you, but after a certain time, when you walk behind your mother, and after a certain time when she walks behind you, you ditch her. So this kind of mother nature motive, when nature, we have changed the world climate. We have become a decisive force in altering the nature of mother nature, and still we see wilderness as an institution. So just like Shakespeare would say, I would say that mother nature would say that uh, we could say rather that you taught me language, you taught me everything, and my profit on it is I know how to destroy you. And also, with the motive of women, various aspects are symbolized. The motive of nourishment, the woman spreading out her shade for others in the form of the tree, and the fruition of flowers. Words actually for flowering and for menstruation are the same in Sanskrit and Tamil. And menstruation itself is seen as a form and a metaphor for a woman's special creativity. Actually, menstruation is a form of creativity or a symbol of fertility. But what happens when a woman suddenly has her periods? We see her as unholy. We like the concept of flowering. We like to revel in the concept of fragrance. But suddenly, when she gets her periods, another symbol of flowering, it is seen as unholy. She is present in immanence. And what is actually a symbol of creativity, we make it, into something mechanical. Actually, her ability to reproduce, it is something creative, but we actually convert woman into a mechanical machine for producing babies, and we confine her only to her motherhood. And as someone said, you can see that she always blooms in this story also. She never does she once bloom for herself. Either it is for her family, for her livelihood, or either it is for her husband. She always blooms for herself, but never others, but never blossoms for herself. Bringing also the important question of agencies. Even when a woman gets pregnant or wants to give birth to a child, how many times is it for herself? We don't have a automatic software installed in a woman exacting her into obedience. Choice is actually a software where you have two options, but it is like by default, it succumbs to patriarchy. So the question of agency, that is symbolized, only if somebody pours water on her, that she can become a tree. So she needs someone's permission first. That is actually symbolized that there. And very importantly, the ideal of beauty is fractured. In Cheluvi means beautiful girl. And if you always look in matrimonials, you'll find this advertisement: tall, beautiful, thin girl wanted for so and so, sometimes even upper caste, all these pre-conceived stereotypes. But and she's called Chelui. So suddenly when she becomes, half woman, half tree, suddenly she becomes the ideal of beauty is suddenly fractured. And then is she no longer a girl? Even in Sherni, there is a scene where her husband comes to Vidya Balan, and there during a very intimate moment, he tells her, "You will look just like you did in college some 15 years back or something." She says, "No, I don't." Why is it where a woman's beauty is accepted only when it is stereotypically, it externally it holds true, or when she is very young? So these are questions we have to address. And also, you can see the ideal of beauty is fractured in Cheludi. Next, we come to the movie Sherni. Okay, and you see that it is in the uh, uh, you have the female gender there. And very importantly, very significantly, the movie opens with a man crawling like a tiger, shows that, the idea that always that the lion is the king of the jungle, or the man, he's at the top of power politics. And then in such an arena, you have Vidya Balan, a spunky woman forest officer who comes against a strong patriarchal system. And here I told you how I tried to focus on the educated, uneducated, how it is the fight against the system is essentially the same. And as soon as Vidya Balan comes and joins the forest department, there is a reference to a powerful predecessor, Sai Prasad. They say that, who held everybody in his reins. There also you have the image of man holding animal in his reins, showing again the sexism, speciesism parallel. And the basic problem is of the movie is a tigress is on the loose, and the tigress has been killing villagers because it's hungry. And in such a scenario, a new female forest officer is posted there, and a very good MLA, even a well-meaning MLA, he asks, "You have sent we have such a huge problem here, and you have sent a female officer." And Sai Prasad also says the forest department is a legacy of the British. So there, in that single sentence, you can find the parallel between the man, patriarchal system, colonialism, everything, and dominant masculine elements. And you can find colonialism itself. How do we define it? We have a story to teach. Yesterday, the other day, it was Vaikom Muhammad Bashir, the very famous writer from Kerala's birthday. We have a story to teach for UG, seeking the rightful inheritors of the earth, where many animals come into the speaker's household, into their territory. And eventually the speaker realizes that we cannot take away, because they are actually the original inhabitants of the earth. So when we speak of colonialism, how do we define it? Chronologically, someone appropriates someone else's territory. If that is colonialism, then the first colonialism should be the colonialism of man over nature. The culture, nature displacement should be the original prototypal colonialism. And in this movie, we find a politician declares, "This is our territory. If the tiger comes here, we will send him to the zoo or circus." Let us see, are they an intrusion on our territory, or are we an intrusion on theirs? Are animals an intrusion on our landscape? Peter Barry, he speaks of 4 different areas. Area number 1, a series of adjoining wilderness, example, deserts, oceans, and inhabited places, continents. Area number 2, the scenic sublime that he calls forests, lakes, mountain cliffs. Area number 3, the countryside, hills, field, woods. Area number 4, the domestic picturesque, parks, gardens, lanes. If you see, when one passes from area 1 over to area 4, the influence of animals become less, and the influence of man actually starts increasing. So you can see that it is not animals, but men who have actually become an intrusion on the animal landscape. And in the whole movie also, there is the idea of how does the tiger cross over from one forest to another without crossing certain villages. So people sound as though the animal is actually an intrusion, but these villages are actually the man-made things that are actually intrusions created by man. And so if we view this in this context, this statement by the politician that this is our territory. If the tiger comes here, we will send him to the zoo or circus. It can be read as somebody saying, if I will come to your country, and if you intrude on me, I will send you to a concentration camp. So when we read it and when we humanize this language, just as we did in Chelvi, it makes a lot of sense. Now, another significant, I already spoke about how man-woman is equated with the speech-silence dichotomy, where women actually function as aporias. In this also, Vidya Balan, she comes, she is at an authoritative position, but she's never allowed to make her own decisions. Always, somebody tries to override her. Always a man's solution is accepted. So like Louis Montrose would say in, Elizabethan Shaping Fantasies essay, with regards to A Midsummer Night's Dream, though Queen Elizabeth is at the peak of power, it is patriarchy that rules. Though the forest officer is a woman forest officer, it is patriarchy that actually rules. And you find all these dichotomies, speech, silence also working here. In a particular scene, when the politician is, when Vidya Balan is, she's at a position of authority and she's speaking with a mic, the politician suddenly, without her permission, he comes and snatches the mic off. And also you find again this, imprisoning women in the idea of productivity. Again and again, you find Vidya Balan's own mother asking her, what will you do if you don't have babies? She says, Ma, that is not the only thing. I have so many other things to do. So that is a problem. When we restrict a woman to her bodily function, she is defined only in terms of that. And also they're kind of, people view certain kind of, there are some preconceived notions. A man can smoke cigarette, but when a woman smokes, it is her character is seen to be flawed. In this particular movie also, you have a particular scene where a man actually finds it strange that a woman in a sari is actually asking for whiskey. And there's another particular scene, when Vidya Balan's husband actually calls her, his friends say that we actually lost a wicket because of you. It reminded me, of, whenever Virat Kohli, whenever he used to underperform, people used to always put the blame on Anushka Sharma. So these kind of parallels, it is mentioned also in a very subtle kind of way. And I already spoke about how women are always identified with certain gaps or silence, and animals. So this parallel between sexism and speciesism, you can see. Women, how do we see women, animals? Either we see them, in today's world, we speak of them as extinct. Again, women as aporias, gaps. Endangered species, animals, female infanticide. And animals as a tourist attraction in a zoo or reserve. Women as catering to the male gaze. In every car exhibition, you see a beautiful long-legged girl, or in movies and item songs catering to the male gaze. So the tourist gaze and the male gaze also work on a parallel here. Pet, women are, very, as I told, in austerity in Australia, very cunningly, men pet them and coax them to stay in the domestic area. Milk or meat producing machine, animal, woman, a child producing machine. Guinea pig for laboratory experiments. Or woman is a ground for a variety of experiments. Biological organism and production of evolution. Squashed dead on motorways. We find animals squashed dead on motorways, and women's predicament are no less. We hear so many cases, and we have the slogan Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. Rather, it should be Beti Ko Padhao, Beti Ko Bachao, Bete Ko Padhao. That should be the actual slogan now. And you see them adapted to our urban environments, usually raiding rubbish bins. Even in urban environments, as I told in respect to these movies, women, we educate them, and still, they are just like on the flowers on the cake. A woman in a movie also, she functions only as a decorative piece. And infestations like head of lice in hyper reality on TV wildlife programs, where they function as anthropomorphic metaphors of sex, violence, and domestic lives. This is how we see them. And another important point I forgot to tell you, even in freezer cabinets of supermarkets, we see that animal only on photographs, and it is actually a simulacrum. It is a copy without the original, because the original is already dead. So this is how the situation of a woman also. Sometimes you have her in posters, when you're actually advertising movies, but actually she's not there. I'll give you, for example, in Three Idiots, Kareena Kapoor's role was said to be a very marginal one. In a similar case, but sometimes when you see it on the poster, when you find that she's only an aporia or a simulacrum. And when you look at, or you find them in wildlife programs, where they function as anthropomorphic metaphors of sex. Women also in soap operas, all kind of, with all the glamorized concept as Louis Montrose would say, maiden, matron. But in reality, she does not exist. As Virginia Woolf would say in A Room of One's Own. Imaginatively, she's of the highest importance. Practically, she's insignificant. She pervades poetry from cover to cover, is all absent from history. And again, it's very significantly in this movie, we can find the reversal of roles. Reversal. When we find all these different people, hunting an animal, we don't find it awkward. But in a particular scene, when the chief head of the forest department, they fail to capture the tiger, all these people start hunting him. Then we find it unusual. So it's okay to gang hunt an animal, but it's not okay to gang hunt a man. And you find the reverse preservations or preservation of humans. There is a particular scene. See that. See where you see the preservation of a human, a fetus in a lab, and you find it a bit, you feel something within yourself. But suddenly, towards the end of the movie, when you find, just look at this, so many animals preserved in a museum. We don't find it awkward. Okay, coming back to my slide. And then we have also the reversal of gaze. I'll come to that. Very significantly towards the end of the movie. Before coming to that, I'll tell you how the movie ends. The basic idea of the movie is Vidya Balan, the forest department rather, they have to capture the animal alive. That is the ethics. They cannot kill the animal. And Vidya Balan is the only one who tries to propagate the idea of non-violence. She says our basic ethic is it is very easy to shoot the animal and capture it. But basically we have to capture it alive. But you find all the men in the system conspiring, and eventually they kill the tigress before capturing the tigress. And we feel, but some way, we feel okay as a heroine lost, but no, there is a certain kind of success is a very subjective term. And there is an idea of fulfillment that she tried till her end, and also there's a silver lining in the sense that she's able to gather, hunter-gatherer, she's able to gather the cubs at least towards the end. And this kind of and finally she's posted because she finds this very unethical that everybody had conspired against her in killing against this animal. And she says she revolts against this, because of which they transfer her to an animal museum. And when she goes to the animal museum, there is a very significant question she asks towards it. Why are there cameras on only one side? Why are the cameras only one side? Why is there a gaze only on one side from the humans? So John Berger claims in contemporary human-animal relationships are characterized by an absence of contact. There is no contact because it is only fixed by gaze. And our gaze objectifies the animals as we construct it as the other. And that is why some kind of meaningful contact is lost. And Helene Cixous, also she describes the gaze of humans as an animating gesture, a state of animal watchfulness. This is how it began. We actually learned gazing from the animals. So let us reverse the roles and dissolve this anthropocentric tendency, as Vidya Balan says. Why are the cameras only on one side? And as a mark of respect, because it was from animals that we initially learned to gaze. And coming to this hunter-carrier theory that I mentioned, it has been mentioned by critics like Cheryl Glorfelty, Ursula Le Guin, etc. You find all these kind of phallic symbols of hunting used by men. Phallic symbol, guns. In this movie, it is predominantly guns, but generally we find spheres, all kind of phallic symbols, and women are associated with a carrier. She carries berries, she gathers them, and she stays at home. And this you find significantly, she gathers the cubs. She gathers the cubs, and her success, and the carrier is also the womb. The womb is also a carrier, and therefore it signifies that hunter-carrier dichotomy. And you can see that in some way the womb succeeds here in gathering the cubs. And at the end of the movie, you see that, in hunter-carrier theory also, I told you, men started hunting and women were asked to restrict themselves to one place. They are not supposed to wander, they are supposed to stay at home. So finally, you find patriarchy again plays their game, as from the wandering forest officer, Vidya Balan is transferred to a stationary animal museum, again restricting her there. Again, in concept with the idea of austerity nostalgia, or what you call new traditionalism, or what you call the women question during Victorian times. Again, she's confined to a static place, and her role of being only carrier. And one important thing this movie subverts, it is called Sherni. Sherni, it is not called Sherni. Is Sherni the tigress? No, it is not only the tigress. The director gives the title to the spunky heroine who tries to subvert the principle of the monstrous feminine. I told you the more feminine is in nature is always seen as monstrous. I talked about the different vixen, bitch. It starts right from Freud, when he's threatened at the site of threatened castration, or at the site of the female genitals. You find it with the Joseph Campbell's, with his idea of toothed vagina. You find it with the idea of the Medusa. And you also find it for all these serpent women, vixen. In a movie called Carrie, they said she was women, when they bleed, they're bleeding like pigs. You find this monstrous principle embodied in nature also. You find all these hurricanes, all these storms named after women. Hurricane Rita, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane or Cyclone Tracy. Have you ever heard of a cyclone or a natural disaster named after a man? And they also use certain sexual cliches to describe, saying this one was temperamental, that one was teasing or flirting with the coastline. And there was a very famous Florida feminist called Roxy Bolton. And ironically, even when she died, the male author described her as a tempestuous Florida feminist. So Sherni, by naming her Sherni, but it stands not only for the tigress, stands for the spunky heroine who subverts this principle of monstrous feminine and says that hunting is not only for killing, it is also for saving. And she brings home this idea of non-violence against patriarchy, therefore subverting the idea of monstrous feminine. And also the idea that, we already spoke about how the title Sherni is subversive, subversive in the sense that the monstrous feminine is subverted. And in deep ecology also, the basic thesis is that there should be an emotional response to nature. And we see that in here when, there's a kind of, a lot of care in her voice when she talks about the tiger, when she talks about the cubs. And it is not merely a rational or intellectual one. And so finally, my favorite dialogue from this movie was when Vidya Balan says, "A tiger is not a man-eater, it is just hungry." If I were to eat chicken or beef, or would anybody call me a chicken eater? Or a beef eater? Or would a branch that is cut off 2 days back, would say that man killed my father when the trees fell off? I don't think so. So that is the basic thesis. A tiger is not a man-eater. It is just hungry. So on that note, I end my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It has been extremely informative, too engrossing, and very interesting. And most of the participants have also commented that this was one of the best out of the 5 days we had.
Happy.
Obviously, since we know that visual media is something that attracts us more than print, and people could relate to it in a better way, as you also said in the beginning. So, they could relate to the explanation of this also very well. And we have some professors from Nirmala College who are watching us from through the YouTube channel, who have also said that. Since they've seen the movies, they could relate to it very well. And in fact, it was your talk that motivated me to watch the movie, because I had to watch it before I could listen to the talk that you're going to present. So it was extremely wonderful listening to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for sparing your time and your sharing your knowledge with us. I would now invite questions from the audience. If somebody wants to ask something, they can unmute themselves and switch on their video and ask the question, please.
Well, Shantri, we can start with Indu.
Yes, I was just calling her name. Indu had asked a question towards the beginning of the session itself when you had started. So, Indu, if you could please unmute yourself and start your video and ask the question.
Thank you so much, Rukaya ma'am. It was such an engrossing presentation, and I was like back into the days of my master's and my bachelor's, that I was doing my literature studies. Now I have shifted to social sciences, so it was really good to hear you. My first question was, because you laid down different uh, types, if I may say, of
Dialectical pace?
Okay. Yeah, different types of ecofeminism.
Yes.
So can you just explain the difference between the vegetarian feminism and the queer feminism, which you mentioned? Because I figured that in vegetarian feminism, as you explained, marginality over there also works in certain fashion. And in queer feminism, definitely the idea of trans is included. So how do you see, how do you differentiate between these two kinds of feminism? I couldn't get it properly. And my second question, I was typing and I couldn't type right away. In Share Me, you see the role of villagers who are actually associated to tribal people. I mean, they were from uh, definitely the movie it is not mentioning exactly that they are tribal people, but then we get to know that they come from a lower caste background. So if you can just speak about what role do they play in actually helping the protagonist in this particular movie in a different fashion.
Okay, thank you so much, Indu, for your question. Coming to the first question, you asked me what was the difference between vegetarian ecofeminism and queer ecofeminism, isn't it? In vegetarian ecofeminism, you know, as we go by the term vegetarian means we give more importance, you know, we do not harm animals. So that is a basic focus, you know, you will see that the one basic focus is that you the focus is not only on you know, human animals, you know, and humans are also a kind of rational animal, but human non-animals that they call it. This idea that their fight is against speciesism, and sometimes, you know, the main focus is on that basically. But it does address these subsidiary issues of intersectionality, the parallel between sexism and speciesism. But you see, just like, you have post-colonial feminism, eventually when they talk about that only, they talk about that also, they talk eventually about white heterosexual women. And here also, when we fight for ecofeminism, though we are talking about women, we are eventually talking only about sometimes, heterosexual women. Somewhere the focus does get lost. So it is to counter that this particular theory called queer ecofeminism came up, that shows that, if you focus too much on this heterosexual ratio, this the same sex, they will be marginalized just because of their sexual orientation. That is where the difference comes in. What is your second question? Yeah, how do the villagers play a role? I have not thought about that. I was just thinking now, but I think they do play, that a species, in this dialectical pair of civilized, uncivilized, and intellectual and emotional, I think these people, tribal villages, being so close to nature, I think their responses are more than intellectual. It is more emotional, being more close to the lap of nature. And that is why they also, you can find that, Vidya Balan is more adept at tackling them, because they can quickly connect to her. But you see, they get angry quickly at the men's suggested solutions. And it is also them, who towards the end, who help her actually in gathering the cups. So that we see that civilized, uncivilized, that intellectual, emotional, dialectical pair working very close to woman, and those close to nature there. So I hope I have answered my question.
Yes,
Right?
ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. There's a question, since we are sharing it live on YouTube, there are some people watching us on YouTube, and they have asked a question over there.
Okay.
There is a researcher, Ritika Singh, who has asked the question, ma'am, as Cheryl Clofetley book on eco-criticism talks about non-human things, what does it mean by, is it appropriate to call inanimate things?
It is not because we just went through Cheluvi. We just had, and there also we view the basic idea of Girish Karnad in humanizing the tree is, when it is an inanimate tree that is killed, suddenly, we have no feeling. Okay, it is a tree after all. But suddenly when you humanize it, it also has a life. It also has a life. Like, for example, if so there are people in coma, or some people with any kind of disability, or any animal that cannot move. Does it give it a right? Does it give us a basic right to kill it? Or let me speak about, the people who fight, against abortion. There is a living being, though it does not have its own choice, it exists. Do we have the right to take its life away? So by humanizing the tree, particularly in Cheluvi, this is the question that Girish Karnad actually tries to bring about. Even animate, even, not only plants and animals, now we have object-oriented theories, even things for their own sake also have their own individuality. So that's my answer to that question. That is a question of inanimate things is what I have, living things is what I have actually addressed in the movie Cheluvi.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I hope Ritika has got her answer. There's another question from Aisha Jennifer Tirki. Aisha, could you please unmute yourself and switch on your camera and ask a question, please?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, it was a very good lecture that you provided. It was very lucidly explained, and since it was a sphere of film studies, I think more people could relate to that. And my question is that from the movie Sherry, we find that the village people are very close to nature, and they depend on it. Also, they had, I think, before the plantation of trees in their in the region where they took their animals for grazing, this incident was not a common occurrence that tiger used to come and hunt them. So we can say that human activities was the main cause that the relationship between the forest animal and the villagers was detrimental, and attacks happened more and more. It came towards the villages to hunt for itself. So the human activity and the human knowledge also kind of gave wild animals like encroachment into the villages.
Yes.
So should humans be not given these freedoms and these knowledges which makes which disturbs the this human and animal relationships. And also from the movie Chelvi, we see that uh, the girl was very happy until and unless the knowledge was shared to other people, and when it became common knowledge, uh, she was exploited and her branches were broken off. So my basic question is, should the knowledge, the access should be given to humans or not?
It is actually, even if it is a knowledge, it is a kind of, what do you say, it is a kind of metaphor for her. That secret is what is special about Cheluvi, and that is what stands for her individuality. So why is it, that a man's privacy is always respected, but a woman's privacy is not expected? If you're going for joint family households also, this secret is actually metaphoric. That is her identity. Cheluvi can become a beautiful tree. And this was quite often how many of us in the Indian context actually respect the individuality or a privacy of a woman. When it is a man's, it is okay. You are not supposed to intrude. Sometimes, someone comes after work, but I know all of us are working women. As soon as we come after work, we are expected our, more than our functions gain precedence over our individuality. And I think that is how it holds significance. How far in with the concept of that revealing your knowledge, it is a secret that is associated with her individuality and privacy. And when it is revealed, a woman's privacy or individuality, it is always exploited. Coming to your previous question, I think you spoke about, yes, isn't it important to discuss this knowledge with the villagers? If you see in the movie itself, right from the beginning, they tell there's a scene, agar aap jungle mein jayenge to wo aapko kha jayega. So that kind of fear is, but towards the end he says, that there is actually a change in the lesson. He says that the animals also have their own existence. We are not supposed to disturb them. If you go there, you're not supposed to go there. You should respect that. There is a kind of evolution in the kind of knowledge that is given to the villagers. And also in the beginning, you see that Vidya Balan, she does not like that small kitten so much, but towards the end, she develops a kind of emotion even to a ferocious tigress. So that evolution is seen there, and it is very important, when, as you said, that is an important question that you raised. Even when you impart knowledge, you should be very careful. You should not say, if you go near the tiger, it will eat you up. That is not the way. You should say that it is hungry. It is not, as Vidya Balan gives that dialogue, it is actually hungry. Why do tigers eat? Why do tigers kill? Either it is for sex, or it is for hunger, or it is for territory. But human beings, they have the capacity not only to kill, but to destroy. You saw in the Nirbhaya case. And yet we call animals, we say man are like animals. I don't think so. It should be the other way around. And we call, animals man-eaters. And in this case also, the way knowledge is important. You see that there's a particular scene, how the newspaper, mediaization, or how they portray this, एक हैवान जंगल में आता है और it is killing all these peoples. Please save yourself. And kind of sensationalism. And it is also called in media studies, it is called disinhibition of violence. These kind of violent ideas, they are not violent, but the ideas in our mind are actually violent. It is called epistemic violence. And this kind of epistemic violence is, it breeds in our mind through this kind of media disinhibition. When we hear this a lot, eventually we are disinhibited. We don't even know that the violence is actually entering in our mind towards animals. So while sharing this knowledge also, it is a double responsibility. We have to be very careful that it is done in a constructive kind of way, to answer your question.
I hope, Aisha, that satisfies your question. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we are over with the question and answer round. And once again, I would request you, as Anjana ma'am requested you, to share the slides, please, because there have been a number of to us to share
Chandani,
this.
please do remind me, just in case I happen to forget.
Sure, ma'am. I would now request Dr. Anjana Singh, Principal Investigator, UGC STRIDE Component 1, to summarize the talk for today and present the formal vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Shantari. I'll take this opportunity to speak my mind in Hindi, because some of our speakers or some of our listeners, and most of them are from Hindi background. So I'll speak my whatever I have to say as a summary in Hindi. I hope you don't mind, Rukaiya ma'am, and you are able to understand Hindi.
I can understand.
Right. So coming to this point, मैं आप लोग सबके सामने जो आप अच्छा प्रीति एक सवाल और करना चाहती हैं. I'll translate it for you. Are you comfortable with question? आप हिंदी में सवाल समझ लेती हैं या मैं इंग्लिश में इसको translate कर दूं?
Sometimes I may understand it, ma'am. Let her put forth. If I don't understand, you can translate it.
There is okay, Preeti, because I think this is a question that should be asked. प्रीति, आप अपने आप को अनम्यूट करके पहले पूछ लीजिए, फिर मैं समराइज करूंगी. पहले ये आप मौका ले लें. प्रीति, आप अपना सवाल पूछ लें. ओके, प्रीति ने कहा है कि पितृसत्ता और उसके द्वारा बनाए रूढ़ी और परंपराओं तथा उनके द्वारा निर्धारित दायरों को बनाए रखकर हम खुद को फेमिनिस्ट कह सकते हैं. क्या इस तरह पितृसत्ता खत्म हो सकती है, जबकि स्त्रियां उन तमाम पितृसत्तात्मक मानकों को बनाए रख रही हों?
What she said is very true. That, you know, we talk about subverting patriarchy. We talk about fighting against this patriarchal rules and traditions, and we call ourselves feminists. But there are some amongst us itself who are actually propagating this kind of heteronormative patriarchy. One example I will give you is the system of dowry. Who is it who wants it more? Is it the son or the mother? It is the mother more in most of the houses. So this kind of, heteronormative patriarchy, we find, and sometimes, even the Nirbhaya case, you find men also asking questions. You find women also asking questions like, what was she doing with her male friend? What was she wearing at that time? What was she doing at that time of the night? But the very next day, when a 4-year-old is raped, what was she wearing? Was she there with a boyfriend? What time was she there? All these questions become irrelevant. So, it is up to women. Sometimes even my mother, she used to tell me, your brother can go on a tour, but you cannot go. But I try to, it is us to, re-educate not only our girls, but also our boys. I tell them, this is, we have to re-educate. I told you, it is not only beti ko, it has become actually beti ko bachao, bete ko padhao. We have to teach our our boy children actually to reverse the gaze, to respect women, and more importantly, these kind of ideology, if I use that we are interpolated from our grandmothers, this heteronormative patriarchy, that also we have to fight against it. It was a good question. Thank you.
धन्यवाद आपका रुकैया मैम. मुझे लगता है इससे खूबसूरत जवाब नहीं हो सकता, और यहीं से मैं अपने इस समरी को आपके सामने, या इसका एक जो सारांश है वो आपके सामने रखने की कोशिश करूंगी. और यही जो रुकैया मैम का लाइन है, मुझे लगता है इस पूरे टॉक का, या इस पूरे आज के जो हमारे बीच में ज्ञान का जो एक्सचेंज हुआ है, हमने आदान प्रदान किया, उसका एक मुख्य बिंदु यही है कि वो जो कह रही हैं कि बेटी को बचाओ और बेटे को पढ़ाओ। बेटे को क्या पढ़ाना है, ऐसा वो नहीं कह रही कि उन्हें स्कूल भेजो, कॉलेज भेजो, बेटी को मत भेजो। वो कह रहे बेटी को ये बेटे को ये पढ़ाओ कि वो बेटी की कद्र करे, बेटी के समान अधिकार रखे, उसकी इज्जत करे और उसको अपने बराबर का समझे, उसको इस्तेमाल की वस्तु ना समझा जाए। पूरी तरह से जब से ये इको फेमिनिज्म के दृष्टिकोण से हमने बात करनी शुरू की है, आप देखेंगे कि इको फेमिनिज्म का जो दृष्टिकोण है वो पितृसत्तात्मक सोच के खिलाफ खड़ा है। और हम स्त्रियां हों या पुरुष हों, चाहे वो इब्राहिम सर बोल रहे हों या रुखैया मैडम बोल रही हों या फिर वो ईवा मैम बोल रही हों, हम एक चीज कह रहे हैं कि पितृसत्ता जो है वो अपने आप को हर चीज के ऊपर वो हावी होती जा रही है। वो एक ऐसी सोच है जो आप प्रत्येक तरह के विचारधाराओं के ऊपर हावी होते हुए देख सकते हैं। इसको एक दो बहुत ही शक्तिशाली फिल्मों के माध्यम से उन्होंने प्रस्तुत करने की कोशिश की। मुझे याद है आज जब ये चेलुवी की बात आई और ये था, तो जब मैं स्कूल में थी और शायद 6 या 7 में पढ़ा करती थी, तब ये मूवी रिलीज हुई थी और इसे दूरदर्शन पर दिखाया गया था और उस समय भी ये मूवी काफी चर्चा में थी। 6-7 साल की बच्ची के रूप में मुझे ये मूवी रात को बहुत तंग करती थी। मुझे हमेशा सपने में ये आता रहता था कि उस लड़की का क्या हुआ, क्योंकि उस समय मैं ये सिंबॉलिकिज्म और सांकेतिक रूप से ये मूवी क्या संदेश छोड़ रही है, इसको समझने में बिल्कुल भी अक्षम थी। तो ये एक सोच मेरे एक बच्ची के रूप में भी मेरे ऊपर ये हावी थी कि उसका क्या हुआ, वो पेड़ ही पूरी या वो लड़की बन गई या उसके बीच का क्या हुआ। ये वो एक थॉट प्रोसेस था जो उस समय था। और मुझे लगता है कि आज शेरनी तक आते आते भी यही सवाल हो जाता है, हम रहेंगे, प्रकृति रहेगी, जंगल रहेगा, या हमारी सोच रहेगी कि हमें हर चीज का इस्तेमाल कर लेना है, हमें हर चीज का उपभोग कर लेना है, क्योंकि हम पैदा ही हुए हैं सारे संसाधनों का उपभोग कर लेने के लिए। आदिवासी विषयों पर जब आप देखिएगा तो इसी ज्यादा उपभोग की जो प्रवृत्ति है, जो मानसिकता है, जो ये कहती है हर चीज को उपयोग कर लो। लाखों करोड़ों साल में प्रकृति ने मिनरल्स बनाए हैं, खनिज बनाए हैं, और उन खनिजों को आप 200 साल में निकाल लेंगे तो ये हार्ट वार्मिंग होगी। कनाडा में देखिए ना, जहां 17 का टेम्परेचर था, आज वहां 49-50 डिग्री टेम्परेचर पर लोग मर रहे हैं। 500 इंसान मरते हैं तो आपको दिखता है, लेकिन अमेज़न के जंगल में आप आग लगा देते हैं, वहां सभी जानवर हजारों लाखों की संख्या में ऑस्ट्रेलिया में मर जाते हैं, और ये हमारे लिए बातचीत का विषय नहीं रहता। जब इंसान मरते हैं तो बातचीत का विषय बनता है। तो ये जो दो शक्तिशाली फिल्में हैं, शेरनी और चेलुवी, ये इंसानों के संघर्ष को दिखाकर वास्तविकता में जंगल का संघर्ष दिखा रहा है। वास्तव में जंगल के ऊपर निर्भर आदिवासी, जंगलों, स्वयं पेड़ों और जानवरों का संघर्ष है जिसकी हम चर्चा कर रहे हैं। तो जब आप आदिवासी विषयों पर आते हैं तो आदिवासी विषयों को अगर आप सिर्फ मानव के इर्द गिर्द ही घुमाते रहेंगे और उसे केंद्रीकृत कर देंगे तो एक संकीर्ण सोच पैदा होती है कि हमको सिर्फ मानव का विकास सोचना है। विकास की परिभाषा जो है, इसको नॉर्थ साउथ डिवाइड कहते हैं, ग्लोबल नॉर्थ एंड ग्लोबल साउथ। इट्स नॉट लाइक ग्लोबल नॉर्थ मतलब वो जो विकसित राष्ट्र हैं, और ग्लोबल साउथ जो हम लोग विकासशील हैं या अविकसित राष्ट्र हैं। इनमें जो अब जो चर्चा चल रही है वो ये है कि विकास का मानक क्या होगा, एक्चुअल परिभाषा विकास की क्या होगी। क्या ये वो विकास है जो हमें वो ग्लोबल नॉर्थ सिखा रहा है, जहां ये हम सब चीज का उपभोग करेंगे, या ये वो विचारधारा है जो ग्लोबल साउथ सिखा रहा है, जिसमें हम चीजों को उतना ही इस्तेमाल करेंगे जितना इस्तेमाल करने की इजाजत हमें प्रकृति देती है। ये आज सिर्फ यहाँ बैठकर यूजीसी स्ट्राइड पर इन मुद्दों पर चर्चा नहीं हो रही। वैश्विक मंचों पर, चाहे वो G7 की बैठकें हो रही हो, G10 की बैठकें हो रही हो, यूनाइटेड नेशंस में बैठकें हो रही हो, विकास कैसे होना चाहिए इस पर बहस हो रही है। और अब तो मैं आपको बताऊं कि रिसर्च के टेबल पे ये बहुत बड़ा मुद्दा है कि ये जो अननेसेसरी एयर ट्रेवल्स हो रहे थे जिसके कारण हमारा ओजोन भी डिप्लीट हो गया, और बहुत बड़ा रीजन है ये कनाडा और ऑस्ट्रेलिया और इन सब के तापमान के लिए। इस तरह का आना जाना अगर ये कोरोना के भय के कारण भी कम हो जाता है तो ये भी कहीं ना कहीं एक अगला कदम होगा हमारे बच जाने के लिए या पृथ्वी के बच जाने के लिए। पृथ्वी हमारे बाद भी रहेगी, पृथ्वी पहले भी थी और हमारे बाद भी रहेगी। पेड़ रहे न रहे, हम रहे न रहे, उसे रहना है, रॉक्स के रूप में, माइक्रोब्स के रूप में, माइक्रो ऑर्गेनिजम्स के रूप में। हमें ये सोचना है कि हम इन अकादमिक चर्चाओं के द्वारा उन सही आवाजों को, जैसे आदिवासियों का प्रकृति के साथ एक अनन्य रिश्ता है, क्या इस तरह की आवाजों को हम सुनने को, मानने को और उस अनुसार अपने आप को परिमार्जित करने को तैयार हैं? और अगर हैं तो इस तरह के मंचों का उपयोग है या इस तरह की बातों, अगर हम इन सब के बावजूद सिर्फ उपभोग की संस्कृति में लगे रहते हैं और यही पितृसत्तात्मकता हमारे ऊपर हावी रहती है, तो शायद हमारे लिए भविष्य नहीं है, हम सिर्फ वर्तमान में बातें करेंगे। तो ये जो चर्चा है जो रुकैया मैम ने की, बहुत नपी तुली और बहुत संतुलित थी। उन्होंने एक सधे हुए अकादमिक के रूप में वो तमाम तरह की बातों को और एक एकदम, जिसे मैं कहूँ, सरल भाषा में आपके सामने रख दिया। उन्होंने बहुत अच्छे से बताया कि कैसे एक को अगड़ा, एक को पिछड़ा, एक को आगे, एक को पीछे मानने का चलन है। उन्होंने आपको इको क्रिटिसिज्म और इको फेमिनिज्म के बीच का फर्क बताया। कई तरह के इको फेमिनिज्म के प्रकार हैं। ये अकादमिक जगत पे स्टूडेंट्स के बेहतरी के लिए था कि वो इन तरह की चीजों को बता रही थी, जिसमें वो कई हिस्सों में बटा पड़ा है इको फेमिनिज्म, यानी एक विचारधारा के अंदर भी कई विचारधाराएं समाहित होती हैं। उन विचारधाराओं को समझा रही थी और उनके बारे में चर्चा कर रही थी। आगे जब उन्होंने चर्चाएं की तो दो मूवी ऐसी चीज है जो हम लोग सब हर समय हर वक्त इंजॉय कर लेते हैं, मजा आता है हमें देखने में, और उसके तहत बातों को समझना बड़ा अच्छा होता है। और कहानी केरल से आ रही हो या कहानी कर्नाटक से आ रही हो या छत्तीसगढ़ के जंगल से आ रही हो, आयशा जेनिफर टिर्की अमरकंटक के ट्राइबल यूनिवर्सिटी में रिसर्च स्कॉलर हैं। तो सवालों का आप देखेंगे हम सब के बीच में यही है कि क्या औरत, जैसे प्रकृति उपभोग की वस्तु मान ली गई है, क्या औरतों को भी हम सिर्फ उपभोग के नजरिए से ही देखते रहेंगे? और इन दोनों को जब हम मिलाएंगे तो हमें वास्तविकता के पास जाने का मौका मिलेगा। आपका वक्तव्य मैडम बहुत सोचने पर बहुत चीजों को मजबूर कर रहा है हम लोगों को, और मुझे लगता है एक अकादमिक का सही मकसद यही होता है कि हम जब लेक्चरर्स बनते हैं तो हमारा ये मकसद नहीं होता कि हम सब चीजें बता देंगे। हम छात्रों में एक ऐसा कौतूहल पैदा करना चाहते हैं, एक जिज्ञासा पैदा करना चाहते हैं जो उनको और सवालों को खोजने पर मजबूर करे और वो एक बेहतर अकादमिक बने। आज का आपका ये प्रयास मैं समझती हूँ उस दिशा में बहुत शानदार प्रयास था। आपने हायर थियरीज और ग्राउंड रियलिटीज, दोनों बड़े बड़े सिद्धांत और एकदम सतही समझ, दोनों को इतने खूबसूरती से साथ में आपने लाया कि हर व्यक्ति उसको समझने के लिए एक बेहतर ढंग से तैयार हो पाया। तो आपने हमारे लिए जितना समय दिया और अपने जो ज्ञान को हमारे साथ बांटा, इसके लिए हम आपके आभारी हैं। और हम आज अपने आप को थोड़ा सा और विद्वान समझते हैं, थोड़ा और हमने ज्ञान हासिल कर लिया आपके इस वक्तव्य से। मुझे लगता है कि इको फेमिनिज्म के दृष्टिकोण के को समझाने के जिस प्रयास के साथ हम आगे बढ़ रहे थे, आपके वक्तव्य के बाद आज और इस 5 दिनों तक लगातार चलने वाले 5 वक्तव्यों के बाद मैं कह सकती हूँ कि हमारे प्रतिभागी अब समझते होंगे कि इको फेमिनिज्म क्या है, इसके प्रकार क्या हैं और इसे किस प्रकार, चाहे वो साहित्य हो, चाहे वो फिल्में हो, चाहे वो सिद्धांत हो या कोई और तरीका हो, आप देख सकते हैं। ये एक चश्मा है। सो आप इसे देखें, आप इसे लाभान्वित हों। इतनी दूर से इतना वक्त निकालकर ये कभी कभी ऑनलाइन प्लेटफॉर्म से मुझे हमेशा से, जब से ये कोरोना आया, मुझे बहुत तकलीफ है कि मैं ऑनलाइन हूँ और ऑफलाइन नहीं हूँ, लेकिन कभी कभी इस मीडियम का भी फायदा है। आपको केरल से शायद हमने ऑफलाइन बुलाया होता तो आपके पास ना समय होता और शायद आप नहीं आ पाते, लेकिन कोरोना का ये फायदा तो है कि आप जैसे विद्वानों को हम लोग केरल से बैठकर हम लोग भारत के विभिन्न हिस्सों में सुन लेते हैं और जो आपका भी ज्ञान है वो भी हमारे साथ साझा हो जाता है। तो आप हमारे साथ आए, आपने हमारा आमंत्रण स्वीकार किया और आप सारे प्रश्नोत्तर को इतनी आसानी से और इतनी सरलता से आपने बताया, समझाया, इसके लिए हम बहुत आभारी हैं। आप सभी विद्वान हमारे प्रतिभागी जो लगातार हमारे साथ बने रहते हैं, सवाल करते रहते हैं और इसमें रुचि रखते हैं और बात कर रहे हैं, एक तरफ से नहीं, दोनों तरफ से बात हो रही है, ये बहुत अच्छी बात है। और हम इन सब के लिए आप सभी प्रतिभागियों के भी आभारी हैं। आभारी हैं हम अपने दो संस्थानों, निर्मला महाविद्यालय और अमिटी विश्वविद्यालय झारखंड के, जिनके तत्वावधान में इस आयोजन को हम करवाने में सक्षम हैं। और साथ ही साथ मैं कहूंगी कि कनेक्टिविटी को भी हमें थोड़ा धन्यवाद दे देना चाहिए कि वो लगातार हमारे साथ बनी हुई है और अब तक हम निर्बाध रूप से अपने कार्यक्रमों को करने में सक्षम हो पाए हैं। पुनः रुकैया मैडम, आपका हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। कृपया आप अपने पीपीटी को हमारे साथ शेयर करें और ताकि हम अपने प्रतिभागियों तक उन्हें पहुंचा सकें। और पुनः मैं कहूंगी कि अगर ऑनलाइन से हम ऑफलाइन की ओर चले जाएं, जो सौभाग्य की बात होगी, तो भी आप हमारा अगला आमंत्रण स्वीकार करें और यहाँ तक आए।
Definitely, ma'am. If not online, offline, online is always there as an option. Don't worry about that.
आप ऑफलाइन आए, हमारा झारखंड बहुत खूबसूरत है, हम चाहेंगे आप इसे देखें भी।
Definitely, I would like to come there. Definitely, ma'am. And thank you so much. Actually, I was also a bit worried because all these days there was no rain. Today suddenly it was raining very heavily, and I was scared about this connectivity issue. But thank God it not played villain. So thank you so much to both of you. It is great being here, an absolute honor to be part of this. And thank you so much to both of you once again. Anjana ma'am and Shani. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so shall I sign off?
Yes, yes.
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
सभी प्रतिभागी, कल हमारा समापन सत्र है, कृपया आप लोग उसके लिए मौजूद रहेंगे। और क्या कोई जो वो दो प्रतिभागी जो इस पूरे 6 दिन के ऑनलाइन के गेस्ट लेक्चर सीरीज में जो इतनी भी बातें कही गई है उस पर अपना वक्तव्य देना चाहेंगे, मैं किसी 2 लोगों को आपको ये मतलब प्रस्ताव देती हूँ कि आप अपना नाम मेरे समक्ष रख सकते हैं। हम आप में से किसी 2 का चयन कर लेंगे, जो वो 2 व्यक्ति जो इच्छुक हों कल अपना इस ऑनलाइन गेस्ट लेक्चर सीरीज के बारे में अपना विचार रखने के लिए कृपया आज मुझसे संपर्क कर लें। फोन नंबर मेरा आपके पास है, आप मुझसे संपर्क करें और फिर हम कल आपको ये मौका देना चाहेंगे। कल हमारा आखिरी वक्तव्य भी है और समापन भी। हमारा आपका साथ आज तक बहुत अच्छा चला है और मैं उम्मीद रखूंगी कि आप आगे भी इसी प्रकार इस मंच के साथ जुड़े रहें। धन्यवाद।